Hello and welcome to today's Situation Report. Today, we'll probably only touch on Ukraine briefly, although we'll certainly address this topic during the Q&A session. The second Iran war has begun. I think that's probably the correct term, and of course, we'll focus on that today. Let me say a few things right up front. This is an ongoing development. It's almost inevitable that there will be misinformation coming out right now, whether it's a misidentification of a weapon system, propaganda, or simply unclear reports. That has to be understood in this context. We're talking about an active development that's taking place in the information space, which is contested. Both sides currently have a vital interest in organizing and interpreting the news accordingly, and making sure their own position is represented. That has to be understood in this context. It also has to be understood, or I also want to point out, that because this stream is taking place a bit earlier than usual, the structure of the second Iran war has begun. Iran War Situation Report 1. At the beginning is certainly a little less than optimal. I think it could have been better, but the stream was announced for 5 p.m. I think, in Germany. And at that time, I was far from finished. And actually, I'm still not done, so I don't want to keep you waiting for another hour, since you're already here, just so I can organize everything better content-wise. I think I'll still be able to get the important points across, and afterwards, we'll take a look at the Q&A session. As for the end of today's stream, we'll see how long I can hold out, and how long the mods can hold out to support me. That will ultimately depend on the information situation. That means today it could go well over 2 hours. It could also last 4 or 5 hours. We'll see how far it goes, how long it continues. But with that, this part is discussed, and we'll move on to the Situation Report section. Holy cow, now save the most at Holy with my code. The Americans call it Operation Epic Fury. The Israelis call it Operation Roaring Lion. Donald Trump announced its beginning. He says that immediate dangers should be eliminated and that Iran should be prevented from obtaining nuclear weapons. Iran's capabilities to spread weapons should also be destroyed. He mentions the deaths caused by Iranian IEDs, the improvised explosive devices that killed hundreds of U.S. soldiers in Iraq. There, the Iranians supplied sophisticated explosive devices with armor-piercing charges, which actually claimed the lives of hundreds of U.S. soldiers. He calls on the Revolutionary Guards to lay down their arms or expect certain death. And to the people he says, "When we are done, take over your government." That is the current situation. He started with explosions in Tehran. About 30 targets were attacked in the first wave. Among them were leadership facilities, intelligence service facilities, and the office of the Supreme Spiritual Leader, Ali Khamenei. We have videos here that show us how cruise missiles fly. Hopefully you can see them here. Altogether, I think there are 23 Tomahawks in this video, which are probably flying over Iraq here. It was reported that this is supposed to come from Iraq, where they are flying accordingly. On the one hand, we can see the density of the wave. You can also see how low they're flying, which highlights the coordination on the American side. Intercepting a cloud of cruise missiles is much harder than intercepting single missiles. That's why concentrated waves are of high military value and have a strong impact. The first targets were the command and the air defense, probably to facilitate further operations afterwards. That's basically standard procedure. You eliminate the decision makers, and you eliminate the means that could prevent you from continuing the fight. The U.S. also says that they used attack drones for the first time. This is actually a U.S. copy of the Shahed drone, which was apparently used in this case. Also from the American side, the attacks did not begin at night, as one might have expected, but actually at 8:10 in the morning on the first day of the Iranian week, because their week doesn't end on Sunday, but on Friday, since that's their holiday. Accordingly, people had just arrived at work when it was 8:10 at least, if they had to be in the office by 8 o'clock. And that's supposed to maximize the impact in the country and make the presence of the leadership in the offices more likely. Now, at the beginning of the week, it is said that the impact for the rest of the week is maximized in this way. The attacks and the targets point to a decapitation strategy. So here, it seems that the leadership of both the military and the government is supposed to be eliminated. And so far, the attacks have mainly targeted the leadership and the intelligence service, not the military itself. It can be assumed that the Americans and the Israelis will spare the Artash as much as possible. So, the regular armed forces, in the hope that they won't side with the regime, but possibly with the population. This time, unlike in the last war, the US is involved from the very first second, in close cooperation with Israel, and Trump says it's for the protection of Americans and the elimination of immediate dangers. But the support of the population also suggests that regime change is an actual goal here. If we look at the attacks, there were relatively quick Iranian counterstrikes, which of course show that Iran was prepared. But what we haven't seen so far are coordinated large-scale Iranian attack waves. The Iranians emphasize that this time there would be no red lines and that they will strike back with all their might. Accordingly, attacks have already targeted various US bases. This has been documented and reported throughout the entire Gulf region. As a result, a quick de-escalation is now significantly less likely. The Houthis are reportedly involved, but there are also reports denying their involvement. As I said, there is currently a lot of misinformation. For example, today a message from the Saudis was also circulated as a statement that they would participate. And when you ran it through the translation program, it simply came out that they were referring to the attacks on the United Arab Emirates. That's what I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, the density of misinformation is currently quite high. Hezbollah's intervention is generally also conceivable, because otherwise they would of course lose all support from Iran if they didn't get involved in the hour of need, so to speak. Trey Yingst, that's the Fox News correspondent, says that Israeli intelligence services told him in a briefing that Hezbollah still has thousands of rockets. So if Hezbollah gets serious, despite the previous successful de-escalation and Israeli attacks in the past 2 years, there is still significant firepower left with Hezbollah that can be directed at Israel. Hezbollah had also announced that they would retaliate if Khamenei were attacked. And here we now have the images. The satellite images show that Khamenei was attacked. His residence was hit, and the latest reports were that the Israelis are certain that Khamenei was killed. How true that is, as I said, will have to be clarified in the end. But at least in this regard, we have the corresponding statements. But that doesn't mean that anything fundamentally changes, explains Ali Hashem in Foreign Policy. He says the Iranian constitution explicitly provides for the case of a sudden loss of leadership. Article 111 stipulates that in the event of the death or incapacity of the supreme leader, power immediately passes to an interim council, which consists of the president, the head of the judiciary, and a senior cleric selected by the assembly of experts. Here is a brief interruption. There are already reports that the president and chief justice have been killed, but it's unclear how much is confirmed. As I said, it's still very early. There will definitely be false reports among them. People will probably be reported as killed who are not. And there will be people who are dead, but it is not yet known. But by that logic, it would come down to that. That means the Israelis are also trying to immediately eliminate the authority that is supposed to replace Khamenei in order to prevent a transition of government. Then he says, the goal is to keep the leadership stable and not to change the political system. It's important that the Constitution lists the qualifications for the next leader. But the selection is not strictly limited to a religious path. He basically explains this in his article in Foreign Policy. The Iranian regime has started to seriously consider how to prevent the failure of its own system. And accordingly, there are numerous institutions that support and control each other to prepare exactly for something like this, so that the killing of a leader does not lead to a collapse. And at least from Ali Hashem's point of view, this makes it unlikely that the killing of Ali Khamenei, if it actually succeeded, would cause the regime to collapse. The commanders who were responsible for the killing of protesters were also targets, Trey Yingst has also said. So the whole thing is a military strike aimed at the leadership. And if we look at the Iranian counterattacks, it also suggests this, especially considering the fact that so far there hasn't been a major wave with 100, 200, or more rockets. This suggests that the Iranian government has prepared itself for the possibility of massive counterattacks, and above all, for the possibility of further decapitation strikes. and has therefore delegated the decision for the operation. Last time, we saw that the Iranian air defense was mainly eliminated by simply destroying the headquarters and killing the people who gave the orders. And that largely took the Iranian air defense out of the game during the crucial first hours. Of course, and as expected, Iran learned from this and said, "We can't take that risk." At least for now, everything points to them having made that decision. That they say, "We can't take the risk that a decapitation strike would prevent us from being able to retaliate." And so they delegated the decision accordingly. That suggests that the attacks seem somewhat uncoordinated, but they are still happening nonetheless. And that would mean that missiles, but also drones, can be launched without central commands once that decision has been made. And as I said, what we see on the ground suggests that this does not prevent coordination for effective waves if the communication structures are in place. But it also doesn't stop lower levels from carrying out attacks if communication has broken down. And that's of course extremely important for the Iranians, because if we look at the videos from the Israelis, which are already being shown here, you can clearly see the rocket and the soldiers next to it. Right now, the Israelis are already releasing the first videos where they attack the rocket bases, or attack the launch vehicles even before the launch. And the longer the Iranian units wait to fire because they're waiting for orders, the more time the Israelis and the Americans, of course, have to destroy the rockets and drones on the ground. From the Iranian perspective, it's clearly the right decision. We can see the rocket is already erected, likely to launch in the next 2 or 3 minutes. It was hit just before launch. And in this way, of course, the Iranians want to prevent this from happening on a broad scale, that their counterattack is stopped before it's even in the air. The Iranian counterstrike is taking place accordingly, and so far Israel, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates have been attacked. There was an impact that was filmed from Bahrain. We can see that here. How a drone, you can see it here in a moment. Where is it? There it comes. Hits a dome here. There were reports that this was radar, but that's nonsense, because radar isn't that low. That's probably satellite communications. But here, there was an impact in Bahrain. Likewise, here is a video that is also supposed to be from Bahrain and shows a rocket impact. Here you could see it coming, the rocket, right here at the impact. That can also be seen. Then there's a picture from the airport in Kuwait, which was reportedly hit by a drone. And from Dubai, there are a whole series of recordings. I can see if I can turn up the volume here. That means the impacts are happening there. A friend of mine is currently in Dubai and sent me a whole series of other videos where you can see the shot-down planes, the debris from the rockets coming down. We also have more footage here. You can see rocket debris coming down there. And just because the rockets were shot down, of course, that doesn't mean they're harmless. Because if the warhead doesn't detonate in the air, it still hits the ground and can still cause damage there. And at least if propellant is left, which is usually not the case at that stage. But at least the propellant can also cause damage. So this has to be understood in this context. And here we have a drone that is hitting the target. And that was this hotel here in Dubai, where the entrance was hit. That means we have impacts in Dubai. In Abu Dhabi, a fatality was also reported, due to rocket debris. That was a few hours ago. This means it is absolutely realistic that there have been more fatalities since then. As I said, we're live here, and of course, that limits our ability to do research to some extent. But there have been numerous impacts. There's also a video from, I believe, Qatar, where a shot-down missile impacts and civilians are seen running away. Of course, that could also have led to deaths on the ground. That means it's a realistic scenario that there are now numerous fatalities. Terrorism worldwide is also a possibility. So far, nothing has been reported in this regard. But the Iranians have carried out attacks on Israeli and Jewish targets in Europe and also in South America in the past. That can of course also be expected in the coming days. And not just within Israel and not just within the USA, but generally worldwide. That's just a warning, if you will. So we shouldn't be surprised if in the next few days, terrorist attacks on Israel or on any Israeli, American, or Jewish targets worldwide are reported. So far, no impacts have been reported from Israel, at least as of the end of the research. It seems that everything has been intercepted so far, but that doesn't mean it will stay that way permanently, because of course, the Israelis only have limited ammunition supplies, and these are being used for interception. How long those will last, and how long the Iranians will still be able to send larger waves at a later time remains to be seen. This time, it should be considerably easier for the Israelis, since they are getting support from the Americans and can refuel their planes in the air with the help of the Americans. And because the Americans use many Air Force bases in the area, and therefore have short flight times, they have the opportunity, once the enemy air defenses have been suppressed, to go after the launch vehicles. That should actually mean that a significant portion of the Iranian missiles will be stopped before they are launched. Especially since the Iranians have a limited number of launch vehicles, which usually carry more than one missile. Normally, if the Iranians have more than one missile per launch vehicle, it means that with each launch vehicle taken out, the Iranians can only fire smaller waves. That also plays a role there. But in general, it is of course to be expected that the Iranian attacks will continue, that the Iranians will also keep firing at the American bases in the Gulf, and that there will also be strikes in Israel with corresponding casualties among those places. That is to be expected. The Iranian regime has apparently cut off the internet again, it has been reported, and among that was this one. And the an Israeli TV channel reports that Mohammed Pakpour, the commander of the Revolutionary Guards, has already been killed. As I said, the reports are currently still contradictory and incomplete. We will have to see how much of it will actually happen. If we look at what is planned with this operation and what will happen there, we have to clearly say that the missile program is supposed to be attacked. The Israelis focused on the bottlenecks during the 12-day war. In the first Iran war. That means they focused on points in the missile program where they could cause the greatest possible damage with just a few attacks. What they didn't do was attack the missile program in its entirety, because they simply didn't have the time for that. They weren't able to fly enough planes and launch enough attacks, given the large number of available targets. We can assume that this time it will be different, and that the Iranian missile program will be attacked in its entirety, from every manufacturing hall, from every production factory for individual components. This will probably be dealt with over time. The same goes, of course, for the nuclear program. This time, there won't just be attacks on individual positions. Instead, this time they will try to destroy as much as possible on a large scale in a lasting way. That can be assumed in this context. The Israelis also say that they want to create the conditions for the overthrow of the regime. And Donald Trump also commented on this in his speech. At the end, he says the following: "In conclusion, I say to the proud people of Iran, the hour of your freedom has come. Stay in your homes and seek shelter, because it's dangerous outside. Look, that's in the right place, because it's dangerous outside. When this operation is complete, take back your government. It will belong to you. This may be your only chance for generations. For years, you have asked America for help and never received it. Now you have a president who is ready to act. America stands behind you with overwhelming strength and devastating power. This is the moment to take your destiny into your own hands and secure a prosperous future. Don't let it pass by." The Iranian Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has also commented accordingly. The help that the President of the United States promised to the brave Iranian people has now arrived. This is a humanitarian intervention, whose target is the Islamic Republic, its apparatus of repression, and its killing machinery, not the great country and nation of Iran. Addressing the armed forces, he says they have sworn to be the protectors of Iran and the Iranian nation, not the protectors of the Islamic Republic and its leaders. Their duty is to defend the people, not a regime that holds our homeland hostage through oppression and crimes. Join the nation and contribute to a stable and secure transition. Otherwise, they will go down with the failed Chief Khamenei and his regime. He addresses the population. I ask you to stay at home for now and remain calm and safe. Be vigilant and ready, at the appropriate time, about which I will inform you in detail, to return to the streets for a final intervention. There are already videos showing Iranians celebrating the attacks. Okay, I guess I have the sound off.
There he is. Wow! Beutelsadern! Wow! Beutelsadern!
Whoa!
Wow! Beutelsadern!
Regime change. To get back to the topic, regime change from the air alone is probably hopeless. Let's not kid ourselves. The only chance is for the Iranians to do it themselves, and there's a high risk here. On the one hand, that civilians will be gunned down again. On the other hand, that parts of the armed forces might defect, but only parts. Then you have a civil war that could last for years and cost millions of lives. It could destabilize the entire region, lead to millions of refugees, and so on. Everything needs to be stated clearly here. The Iranian regime, which hardly anyone would shed a tear for, but the risks must be clearly acknowledged. Without ground forces, you can't achieve regime change by just bombing from the air. You can make it easier, but the regime change itself has to be carried out by the Iranians. There's no other way. In the past, the regime has even used children to clear mines. In the Iran-Iraq war, they bought plastic keys there, I think from South Korea, and hung them around the children's necks. Keys to paradise. And they used them as human mine clearers to clear the battlefield for the soldiers who followed, a regime that accordingly shows no inhibitions. So in a civil war, the opposition would be facing that. A regime that is willing to sacrifice civilians and even minors. The Iranian foreign minister said in an interview that as far as he knows, the president and the Ayatollah are still alive. That was actually a few hours ago. Overall, the attacks are now much larger, better coordinated, and stronger than during the 12-day war. The immediate involvement of the US, the decapitation strikes, the rapid Iranian attacks, as well as the strikes against third countries. All of these are signs that this is much bigger in its current scope than what we have seen in the past. And the attack took place during the day. And during negotiations, to maximize success, that's nothing new either. We've seen that before. For example, I pointed this out on Twitter days ago. The statements that a foreign minister is traveling here or there or something like that mean nothing. Yesterday, for example, there were rumors again that it could happen tonight. And among other things, it was mentioned that Marco Rubio announced he would fly to Israel next week, and interestingly, did not want to take any journalists with him, which is a remarkable event. Because normally, on such trips by government officials, journalists are always invited to come along. And if they are not invited, of course, there is a reason for that. In this case, the attack happened during the day, and precisely because of negotiations, in order to maximize success. Because it must be understood that no one can stay in bunkers permanently and remain at maximum readiness all the time. And when attacks are expected at night, as everyone did, you sleep in the bunker, but during the day, you come out of the bunker to work, so you can use the better infrastructure in the regular offices. And that is probably the reason why this time the attack happened in broad daylight, and not in the middle of the night. It will be interesting to see what personnel the Israelis and the US have in Iran. Israel had hundreds of agents on the ground before the first Iran war, who were essential for victory because they carried out decapitation strikes, destroyed headquarters, and attacked air defenses. The Iranians then tried to hunt down these agents, and they were certainly partially successful. But to what extent this happened is hard to tell. Nothing is known yet about them being reactivated, but there will be agents on the ground. We will have to see what they do. It's also interesting what the US has done in preparation. It has now become known that during the protests, the US smuggled Starlink terminals into the country to enable Iranians to communicate. Of course, the question arises here. What else was smuggled into the country? And was anything prepared with armed groups so that a change of sides can be expected? Because the Americans have now had about 1.5 to 2 months of preparation time for this attack. during which the likelihood of an immediate military strike or decisive action was extremely high. And it's only logical that at this point they're trying to gain allies within the country. Whether this has been successful is not yet clear. Iran says there is currently no communication with the US, but the US knows how to reach the foreign minister. So, as far as the latest information goes, the Americans haven't currently said, okay, this and that needs to be done. In general, it can be expected that the campaign will adapt to developments in Iran after the initial steps. That means if there are concessions, the attacks will end more quickly. If there are positive signs, maybe fewer attacks. If there are negative signs, more intense attacks. In general, we can assume that Donald Trump wants to influence the country's decisions and negotiations with the country through the intensity of the airstrikes. That's probably what it will come down to. But Trump is definitely hoping that it will be over quickly, and that's now much less likely because the escalation has increased. There have already been statements that the Revolutionary Guards have announced they would close the Strait of Hormuz. As of the last update, I haven't seen anything happen in this regard. We can update again. We can see that ships are still passing through the Strait of Hormuz. For example, these ships here were already here earlier. Normally, if they were taking it seriously, they would have turned around immediately. What do we have here? An Indian ship, an Indian oil tanker, is still entering the Strait of Hormuz. So at this point, it doesn't seem to have had any real impact yet, even though we can see that quite a few ships are waiting here in front of the Strait of Hormuz. But I would have had to monitor the situation longer to determine if they've been there for some time. So for the moment, we can definitely see that the Strait of Hormuz does look a bit emptier, but we don't see that all the ships in there have fled, or that all of them have escaped from there. And as I said, when I last checked, I also didn't see that there had already been any attacks. But of course, in the long run, that's something we should expect. So, that's it for now. Let's do a quick commercial break, because during the live stream, this is the only way to do it if I don't want to bother you with automatic ads all the time. And afterwards, we'll move on to the Q&A session. We'll do it in a way where we combine questions. On the one hand, we'll go through the questions, and at the same time, I'll try to coordinate with the mods and so on. And through my own efforts, I'll manage to process the latest updates and ideally contextualize them right away, so that I can provide you with real, genuine added value. As for the attacks now, so that you can actually get something out of it. But as I said, we'll see. We'll take at least a short commercial break now, and then we'll continue directly with this part.